Shalom. Today I'm going to share with you on the what I believe to be the impending Middle East wars. You would all have kept up with the news how Russia is poised on the border of Ukraine, and many people believe that they will invade very shortly. However, I am of the opinion that once the invasion takes place, it may trigger a number of Middle East wars. And that's the subject of my topic. Let's turn to the very important text in Psalms 83. I'm going to read all 18 verses. A song or psalm of Asaph. Keep not thou silence, O God. Hold not thy peace. Be not still, O God. For lo, thy enemies make a tumult, and they that hate thee have lifted up the head. They have taken crafty counsel against thy people, and consulted against thy hidden ones. They have said, Come, let us cut them off from being a nation, that the name of Israel may be no more in remembrance. For they have consulted together with one consent. They are confederate against thee. The tabernacles of Edom, and the Ishmaelites of Moab, and the Hagrites, Gebal, and Ammon, and Amalek, the Philistines, with the inhabitants of Tyre. Ashur also is joined with them. They have helped the children of Lot, Selah. Do unto them as unto the Midianites, as to Sisera, as to Jabin at the brook of Kishon, which perished at Endor. They became as dung for the earth. Make their nobles like Oreb and like Zeeb, yea, all the princes as Zebah and as Zalmunna, who said, Let us take to ourselves the houses of God in possession. O my God, make them like a wheel, as the stubble before the wind, and as the fire burneth the wood, as a flame setteth the mountains on fire. So persecute them with thy tempest, make them afraid with thy storm. Fill their faces with shame, that they may seek thy name, O Yahweh. Let them be confounded and troubled forever. Yea, let them be put to shame and perish, that men may know that thou, whose name alone is Yahweh, art the Most High over all the earth. Now, this very important psalm talks of the enemies surrounding Israel plotting to exterminate her. Now, the first question is, as with all prophecies, whether and to what extent Psalms 83 has already been fulfilled. Now, here I must inform you that commentators are divided. There are some who actually believe that this Psalms 83 has already been fulfilled. For example, at the 1948 war over Israel's proclamation of independence, at the Six-Day War of June 1967, the Yom Kippur War of October 1973. However, we should use caution regarding prophecies and the fulfillment. Frequently, the same prophecy has more than one fulfillment. Now, there are good reasons to believe that there's yet a final fulfillment of Psalms 83. Firstly, not all the countries or tribes listed were involved in the earlier wars. Secondly, the 10 countries or tribes attacking Israel soon are not mentioned in the Gog-Magog War. Thirdly, a place called Bosra, which is part of the Edomite part of Jordan, will be a place of refuge for the last 3.5 years of the Antichrist reign. And here I quote for you the passage from Revelation chapter 12, reading from verses 13 to 14. And when the dragon saw that he was cast unto the earth, he persecuted the woman which brought forth the man child. Verse 14. And to the woman were given 2 wings of a great eagle, that she might fly into the wilderness, into her place, where she is nourished for a time and times and half a time from the face of the serpent. And we find confirmation in what Yeshua said in Matthew chapter 24, verses 15 and 16. His warning: when you, therefore, shall see the abomination of desolation, spoken of by Daniel the prophet, stand in the holy place, whosoever reads, let him understand. Then let them which be in Judea flee into the mountains. So you can see quite clearly that Yahshua linked this event of the woman fleeing into the wilderness for 3.5 years actually comes about when the Antichrist will commit what the Bible calls, what the book of Daniel calls, the abomination of desolation. And we know from previous experience of a king called Antiochus Epiphanes around about 165 or 167 BC. He offered a pig on the altar of Yahweh's temple in Jerusalem and set himself up as God, as indeed the Antichrist will do. The fourth important point is that Yahshua, when he comes back to deal with all the nations, the armies of the world that will come against Jerusalem at the battle or the war of Armageddon, he will at the same time deliver the believing Israelite remnants from a place called Bosra that I mentioned earlier, somewhere in the south of Jordan. And here I quote for you the book of Isaiah, chapter 63, reading from verses 1 to 4. Who is this that comes from Edom with dyed garments from Bosra? This that is glorious in his apparel, traveling in the greatness of his strength. I that speak in righteousness, mighty to save. Wherefore are you red in thy apparel, thy garments like him that treadeth in the wine fat? I have trodden the winepress alone, and of the people there were none with me. For I will tread them in my anger, and trample them in my fury, and their blood shall be sprinkled upon my garments, and I'll stain all my raiment. For the day of vengeance is in my heart, the year of my redeemed is come. So it's quite clear that the place where the Edomites reside includes a place called Bosra. And in the last 3.5 years of the Antichrist reign, immediately after the abomination of desolation, the believing remnant of Israel will try to flee to that place. Now that would only be possible if the entire nation of Jordan, which includes Moab, Ammonites, Ammonites, and Edomites, were all vanquished by Israel. Next, let's take a look at the 10 surrounding countries and or tribes mentioned in Psalms 83. Number 1, the tents of Edom. Now, this obviously refers to the Palestinians and southern Jordanians, including the Edomites. And the word tent informs us that probably these are refugee camps, temporary encampments. Number 2, Ishmaelites. Now, we all know that Ishmael, the first son of Adam that was born of the slave girl Hagar, is known as the father of the Arabs. And I'll have more to say about this very shortly. Thirdly, Moab includes the Palestinians and central Jordanians. Fourth, Hagrites, Egyptians. Remember, Hagar is the matriarch of Egypt, or she came from Egypt. Gebal, or Byblos, the Hezbollah and northern Lebanese. Ammon, Palestinians and northern Jordanians. Please note that Moab and Ammon were fathered by Lot through his two daughters who made him drunk shortly after they got out of Sodom and Gomorrah. Then you have Amalek. This refers to the Arabs of the Sinai area. Again, I will comment on this shortly. Philistia, that obviously refers to the Gaza Strip Hamas. Tyre, Tyre, Hezbollah, and southern Lebanese. Assyria is a biblical term describing a geographical area that encompasses the current Syria and the northern part of Iran. Okay, so let's look at the prophecies that are yet to be fulfilled and see how they dovetail with the events that are described in Psalms 83. Let's look at Egypt. What does the Bible have to predict about the end time fate of Egypt, the Hagrites? And here I refer you to the book of Isaiah, chapter 19, reading from verse 1 to verse 5. Isaiah 19 and verse 1, the burden of Egypt. Behold, Yahweh rides upon a swift cloud, and shall come into Egypt, and the idols of Egypt shall be moved at his presence, and the heart of Egypt shall melt in the midst of it. And I'll set the Egyptians against the Egyptians. They shall fight everyone against his brother, everyone against his neighbor, city against city, and kingdom against kingdom. Verse 3, and the spirit of Egypt shall fall in the midst thereof, and I'll destroy the counsel thereof, and they shall seek to the idols, and to the charmers, and to them that have familiar spirits, and to the wizards. And the Egyptians will I give over into the hand of a cruel lord, and a fierce king shall rule over them, saith Yahweh, the Lord of hosts. And the waters shall fail from the sea, and the river shall be wasted and dried up. More on this later on. Then let's look at the prophecy about Assyria, covering Damascus, northern Iraq, and parts of southeastern Turkey. Here referred to Isaiah chapter 17, verses 1 to 3. The burden of Damascus, behold, Damascus is taken away from being a city, and it shall be a ruinous heap. The cities of Aroa are forsaken, they shall be for flocks, which shall lie down, and none shall make them afraid. fortress also shall cease from Ephraim, and the kingdom from Damascus, the remnant of Syria, and they shall be as the glory of the children of Israel, says Yahweh. Now, let me make some comments first on Egypt and then Damascus. We all know that Egypt depends upon one river, the River Nile. But unfortunately, the source of the waters in the mountains that feed into the Nile originate from other parts of Africa like Sudan, Ethiopia, and so on. There are two dams in question. The Aswan Dam, built by the Egyptians themselves, which they can control the volume of water that goes into the Nile. But there's another one built in Ethiopia. Some call it the Renaissance Dam. And that is a dam that's just been completed. It's a huge one. And the nation that controls the dam has the power to control the volume of water flowing into the Nile eventually. So one of two things can happen. That a controlling nation will shut off the flow of water, the Nile will dry up and be unfit for agriculture, there'll be no fish available, they all die. An alternative possibility is Israel drops a nuclear bomb into that big dam and so pollutes the water that all the polluted water flows into Egypt. These are the possibilities that lie ahead. On Damascus, which is the capital of Syria, we all know for the last 3 decades or more, there has been civil war in Syria. So the President Assad is still reigning in Damascus. Of all the country of Syria, only Damascus is relatively untouched by war. But Isaiah 17 tells us that virtually overnight, Damascus will become nothing more than a ruinous heap of stones. Now, this can only happen when a nuclear bomb is exploded there. So instantly, overnight, Damascus would disappear into history. But at the same time, the same prophecy also talks about Ephraim, the northern part of Israel, that because of perhaps Assad first attacking Israel, the northern part, perhaps with chemical weapons or whatever, that Ephraim, the northern part of Israel, gets somewhat decimated in the process. Okay, let me go on to talk about a prophecy regarding Gaza or Philistia. And I refer you to the book of Amos, chapter 1, reading from verses 6 to 8. Thus says Yahweh, for 3 transgressions of Gaza and for 4, I will not turn away the punishment thereof, because they carried away captive the whole captivity to deliver them up to Edom. But I'll send a fire on the wall of Gaza, which shall devour the palaces thereof. I'll cut out the inhabitant from Ashdod, and him that holds a scepter from Ashkelon. I'll turn my hand against Ekron, the remnant of the Philistines shall perish, says Yahweh Elohim. And here it looks as though there's total destruction. And that can only happen if a nuclear weapon is deployed. Next, let me talk about the Ishmaelites. Now, the Bible commentators like Bill Salus has a lot to say about Psalms 83. In fact, he has written 2 books of Psalms 83. The second one is an update of the first. And he says that Ishmaelites refer to Saudi Arabia. I beg to disagree. I believe the Ishmaelites refer to a lot more countries than Saudi Arabia alone. So let me give you some background about Ishmaelites. Ishmael, as we all know, was the firstborn of Abraham that he conceived through the slave girl Hagar with the consent or with the suggestion at the suggestion of his wife Sarah, because Abraham and Sarah were still waiting a long time for the arrival of the promised son Isaac. So, like all of us, they walked in the flesh and thought they will help speed the vision along and produce a child and a son and heir for Abraham. So that's how Ishmael got conceived. Now we all know that Ishmael was cast out of the household together with her mother at the insistence of Sarah and with the agreement of Yahweh. You know the story that Yahweh promised Ishmael that he would bless him richly. Okay, so Ishmael is commonly regarded by both Jews and Arabs as the progenitor of the Arabs. And Ishmael has had 12 sons who headed 12 nations. However, most of these nations cannot be identified anymore. The Jews themselves, through the rabbis, are believed that Ishmael was the ancestor of a number of Bedouin tribes dwelling in southern Palestine. I've been to Israel, I've been to the Bedouin desert country, and we had a tea hosted by a Bedouin uh, tribe. Now, the Arab League has currently 22 members. 22 countries are member countries of the Arab League. And they're all Ishmaelites. Question that I have is, how many of these 22 members who attacked Israel in Psalms 83? Bill Salas only mentions Saudi Arabia, but I believe the term Ishmaelites has a broader connotation than merely Saudi Arabia. And note something else, that under President Trump, uh, 4 Arab countries have already signed what is called the Abraham Accord with Israel, namely the UAE, Bahrain, Morocco, and Sudan. All right. Now, although Bill Salus, who's a well-known prophecy author and commentator, believes that Ishmaelites refer only to Saudi Arabia, and I differ from him. And I want to note something else that Dedan, Dedan, is part of Saudi Arabia, is still around when the Gog-Magog War occurs. You can see the reference to Dedan in Ezekiel chapter 38, verse 13. So although Dedan was not involved in the would not be involved in the Gog-Magog War, it is a bystander in that war, asking questions about the invaders and their motives, whether they were there to get the riches of Israel. So I just point this out to you that, in my view, the term Ishmaelites cover a lot more nations than Saudi Arabia alone, or even parts of Saudi Arabia. Then note something else. Kedar and Tema, the sons of Ishmael, are located, and their descendants are located in Arabia. And the prophecy notes about Kedar. Kedar will be diminished. Let me turn to the prophecy about Arabia, and you can find this in Isaiah 21, reading from verse 13. The burden upon Arabia. In the forest of Arabia shall you lodge, O ye traveling companions of Dedanians. Verse 14. The inhabitants of the land of Tema brought water to him that was thirsty. They prevented him with their bread, him that fled. For they fled from the swords, from the drawn sword, from the bent bow, and from the grievousness of war. For thus says Yahweh unto me, within a year, and according to years of hireling, and all the glory of Kedar shall fall. And the residue of the number of archers, the mighty men of the children of Kedar, shall be diminished, for Yahweh Elohim of Israel has spoken it. Unquote. So clearly, parts of Arabia are going to be consumed in the Psalms 83 war. Now let me turn to Tyre, Tyre, which is Lebanon in current knowledge. Here refer to Amos chapter 1, verses 9 and 10. Thus says Yahweh, for 3 transgressions of Tyrus and for 4, I will not turn away the punishment thereof, because they delivered up the whole captivity to Edom and remembered not the brotherly covenant. But I will send a fire on the wall of Tyrus, which shall devour the palaces thereof. See the fire and devouring the palaces? That suggests a huge catastrophe that probably will be accomplished through a nuclear weapon. Then let's look at the prophecies regarding Ammon and Moab, both of them located in the kingdom of Jordan. I refer again to the book of Amos, chapter 1, verses 13 to 15. Thus says Yahweh, for 3 transgressions of the children of Ammon, and for 4, I will not turn away the punishment thereof, because they ripped up the woman with child of Gilead, that they might enlarge their border. I'll kindle a fire in the wall of Rabbah, it shall devour the palaces thereof, with shouting in the day of battle, the tempest in the day of the whirlwind. The king shall go into captivity, he and his princes together, says Yahweh. Again, Amos chapter 2, verses 1 to 3. For thus says Yahweh, for 3 transgressions of Moab, and for 4, I will not turn away the punishment thereof, because he burned the bones of the king of Edom into lime. And I'll send a fire upon Moab, it shall devour the palaces of Keroth, and Moab shall die with tumult, with shouting, with the sound of the trumpet. I'll cut out the judge from the midst thereof, will slay all the princes thereof with him, says Yahweh. So you can see, the prophecies about Ammon and Moab are yet to be fulfilled. And for both, the fires that are mentioned, the windstorms that are mentioned, the tempest, reminds us of a nuclear weapon being used. A very interesting point that Amos 2:1 makes, that he is against the king of Moab, because at one time he burned the bones of the king of Edom into lime. That is a reminder to us that we are to treat the dead with respect and bury them properly, that even the bones should not be burned with fire. So clearly, cremation is not sanctioned in the Bible. So let me turn next to the Amalekites. Now, Amalek was the grandson of Esau and his wife. He had many wives. His wife called Ada, Canaanite, via Eliphaz, the son that was born to both of them. So clearly, Amalek and his descendants have got Canaanite blood, Canaanite DNA. And we know what the Bible says about Yahweh's instructions to the Israelites, that when they went into the promised land, they were to exterminate all the Canaanites. So Amalek, being born of Esau, the father of the Edomites, and Ada of the Canaanites, would have inherited tremendous hatred for the Israelites. And they were the first ones in the wilderness to obstruct and to harass the Israelites when they were on the way to the promised land. They are currently believed to be located south of Israel in the Negev desert, but are now largely assimilated to the surrounding nations. Yahweh, of course, knows who they are, where they are. So in Psalms 83, they are mentioned explicitly, and Yahweh has prophesied the ultimate destruction. There are several what I call verses in different parts of the Bible, but I refer to one. Exodus chapter 17 and verse 14. Yahweh said unto Moses, write this for a memorial in a book, and rehearse it in the years of Joshua, for I will utterly put out the remembrance of Amalek from under heaven. And in fact, there's another verse where Yahweh says, he will harass them from generation to generation, but ultimately he will exterminate them altogether. And I believe that it will be in the war of Psalms, the final war of Psalms 83, where the Amalekites will be completely destroyed. A little bit more of history about the Amalekites. You may remember that King Saul was instructed by Samuel, giving instruction to him from Yahweh, that he was to destroy Agag, Agag, king of the Amalekites, and all his people, men, women, and children, including infants, cattle, sheep, and camels, totally. Now we know that Saul disobeyed, kept the king alive, and kept some of the cattle and sheep alive, ostensibly to make sacrifice unto Yahweh. For disobedience, he lost his kingship. And you can see here that the Amalekites were supposed to be completely exterminated, including the animals. Why is it so? Well, one possibility is that the Amalekites practiced bestiality, sex with animals. But we know for sure that they were able, by some witchcraft, to transform themselves, present themselves temporarily as some of the animals listed earlier. But anyway, the sum total of the point of the prophecy is that they will eventually be totally exterminated. Let's look at Elam. I refer to Jeremiah 49 verses 34 to 39. The word of Yahweh, they came to Jeremiah the prophet against Elam, the beginning of the reign of Zedekiah, king of Judah, saying, thus says Yahweh of hosts, behold, I will break the bow of Elam, the chief of their might. And upon Elam will I bring the four winds from the four quarters of heaven, will scatter them towards all those winds. There shall be no nation whither the outcomes of Elam shall not come. For I'll cause Elam to be dismayed before their enemies, before them that seek their life, I will bring evil upon them, even my fierce anger, says Yahweh. I will send a sword after them till I have consumed them. And I will set my throne in Elam and will destroy from thence the king and the princes, says Yahweh. But it shall come to pass in the latter days that I will bring again the captivity of Elam, says Yahweh. Now let's note a number of points about Elam. Again, not all prophecy commentators, interpreters are of the opinion that this prophecy against Elam uh, yet lies to be fulfilled. Bill Salus, the prophecy expert that I quoted earlier, has actually written a book about Elam, and is very strongly of the opinion that Elam's destruction will come pretty soon. And you might want to know the location of Elam is exactly that part of Iran where the nuclear reactors of Iran are located. And we all know that Israel is poised to destroy it. And I believe the only real way of destroying it totally is by a nuclear device. So everybody is expecting this. So I believe, along with Bill Salus, that even if Elam had some previous partial fulfillment of the prophecy against it, there's yet going to be a final fulfillment very shortly. You can read about it any day now that Israel has bombed Elam because Iran Iran is furiously, earnestly developing nuclear weapons. And Israel knows that the time is very short if it wants to put an end to the nuclear program of Iran. Now, of course, we all understand that if Israel does so, then all hell will probably break loose in the Middle East. And so one war will follow another. Let's next look at another prophecy about Edom and turn to Jeremiah or Yirmiah, chapter 49, verse 13. For I have sworn by myself, says Yahweh, that Bosra shall become a desolation, a reproach, a waste, and a curse, and all the cities thereof shall be perpetual waste. That clearly is a prophecy that is yet to be fulfilled, and probably will be fulfilled when the Psalms 83 war takes place soon. And again, you turn to the book of Amos, chapter 1, verses 11 and 12. For thus says Yahweh, for 3 transgressions of Edom, and for 4, I will not turn away the punishment thereof, because he did pursue his brother with a sword, did cast off all pity, his anger did tear perpetually, did kept his wrath forever. But I'll send a fire upon Teman, which shall devour the palaces of Bosra. So you can see the more than one prophecy about the end time destruction of Bosra. And I'm firmly convinced that this must take place before the abomination of desolation. Why? Because once the abomination of desolation takes place in the temple of Jerusalem by the Antichrist, there are only 3.5 years left before Yeshua returns to this world, to this earth, to vanquish the armies gathered against Jerusalem at Armageddon. So, the timetable is set ahead of us. Bosra must be available for the believing remnant of Israel to flee to the moment the abomination of desolation takes place. I mentioned this earlier. Now, let me say a few words about the so called Samson option. The Samson option is a name that some military analysts and authors have given to Israel's deterrence strategy of massive retaliation with nuclear weapons as a last resort against a country whose military has invaded and or destroyed much of Israel. We all know about it. The newspapers report it. Israel wants it to be known that when it is really hard pressed in a war situation, and you can imagine Psalms 83, where the surrounding tribes and nations converge on Israel with the express purpose of exterminating it, it will become desperate and will use a Samson option. And furthermore, as I mentioned more than once in this video, the destruction of the surrounding enemies of Israel in Psalms 83 suggests the use of nuclear weapons. For example, overnight, Damascus becomes a ruinous heap, fires upon the mountain, cities being totally destroyed. That can only happen with a nuclear weapon. So, what I believe, and Bill Sellers strongly believes, is that the Psalms 83 war will set the stage for the Gog-Magog War. And let me quote from a source. Psalms 83 seems to precede the Ezekiel 38 invasion. Dr. Chuck Missler is one of many who believe that in Psalms 83 there's a great victory for Israel that sets the stage for Ezekiel 38 coalition to take the spoils of Israel. If the Israelis thoroughly rout the Muslim enemies that surround them, increase their geographical size some tenfold, Israel would certainly have a good deal of additional spoils waiting to be taken. Unquote. This comes from a website called Jashow, JASHOW.org. So there you are. That what is in store immediately in the future, and we have to watch events in Europe, particularly impending invasion of Ukraine. Let me add a further word on the Ukrainian situation. President Putin of Russia has now threatened to put nuclear weapons in places like Cuba, Venezuela, both countries which have a deep hatred of America, and also on nuclear submarines close to the shores of America. The idea being that America will have less than 5 minutes notice of any impending nuclear strike via missiles. And we all know that several countries, particularly Russia, China, even North Korea, have already developed what is called hypersonic weapons that, unlike the typical intercontinental ballistic missiles, these hypersonic missiles can travel at a low altitude at 3 times or more the speed of sound and are highly maneuverable and can be targeted very easily or guided to their destination. And they can come from different quarters of the earth. Russia or China or North Korea could send a hypersonic weapon via Antarctica to eventually reach North America, and they will be expecting attacks from the north or elsewhere. So we are living now in a very dangerous world. Any of these events can take place sooner rather than later. We have talked about the destruction of Mystery Babylon before, and maybe in the future video we'll try to bring that subject in to tie in with the various wars that are impending. So, shalom for now.